The flood of Noah. This has all been background. Now we get to the famous story of Noah's Ark. It's amazing how many people say, well, skeptics say the ark was not big enough to hold all the species. Couldn't be. Well, how big was the ark? They don't know. They don't know. How many species were there? We're not sure. Well, let's take a look at this. The ark was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. It's specified. There's some scholastic debate just exactly what a cubit is. Anywhere from 18 to 22 inches is the typical estimate. For our purposes, we'll just assume it's 18 inches, a foot and a half. That would make this ark 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It would have a displacement then of approximately 24,000 tons, 1.4 million cubic feet, the equivalent roughly of 522 railroad cars. That's a non-trivial volumetric space. That would be room enough for 125,000 sheep. Now, taking a sheep as a nominal average, obviously many animals are smaller, more smaller than larger, and there are, of course, obviously some large exceptions. But in any case, how many species? A defendable estimate is about 18,000 on the high side. So you got 125,000 sheep, you got room for 18,000 species. That leaves you room for a few large ones. And now there's a couple of other, we don't know. We do know that whatever entered the ark a year later left. They lost none, gained none. Losing none, okay, fine, they were preserved, none died. That's surprising. But secondly, the fact there was no multiplication, no additions, indicates that God somehow, most scholars presume, we don't say this, but presume that some kind of hibernation may have been established, because God is in this thing, obviously. But let's go a little further. This is all based on the cubit of 18 inches, the most common estimate you see in most of the textbooks. But there are cubits that virtually approach 25 inches. If it was a 25-inch cubit, just to give you some feeling here, that would be 625 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 63 feet deep. And its displacement then would be 65,000 tons, 4.1 million cubic feet, 1,400 railroad cars, and of course that gets to be, a third of a million sheep and so forth, and you still only have 18,000 species. So the point is, this estimate is not only very large in the original, but even it's also vulnerable to being much larger depending on what the cubit really was. And as a Naval Academy graduate, I have to talk a little bit about the marine architecture here. The ark, as I say, was 50 feet, using a foot and a half cubit, about 50 feet wide and 30 feet high. That turns out to be mathematically a very useful ratio, because you have the center of gravity in a device like this, and you have a center of buoyancy, depending on the water that it displaces. And if it tilts over, gravity is pulling down from the center of gravity. The center of buoyancy is pushing up from the center of buoyancy, and you'll notice there'll be a tendency to write this up. It turns out with these particular ratios, it can sustain an enormous tipping and still be stable. These ratios have a very, very attractive stability hydrologically, if you will. And so this is not some primitive contrivance here. There's some very subtle engineering behind this.